Just a bit outside. He tried the corner and missed.
All right, it is time for another edition of Hardcore Baseball Facts and Talk here on Sports Talk with the coach, Jim Toman, just a bit outside. Coach, good evening. How are you?
Phil, I'm doing great, man. I saw a lot of good baseball this past week, and I wanted to talk to you guys and let the fans know what went on in the state of South Carolina. But it's boiling down. It's down to 2-3 weeks, and then the tournaments, and we're trying to figure out who's the top 8 national seeds and who's going to host. And I think that 16 guys get to host, and who's in regionals and who's out. So there's a lot of guys on the bubble from the outside looking in, and then there's a lot of guys that have solidified themselves. But these next 2-3 weeks are going to be a blast because there's a lot of things that are going to happen, good and bad, for a lot of teams. Well,
what'd you take from this weekend involving, let's go with Clemson, Gamecocks, Coastal, and Charleston?
Absolutely. That's the top 4 in the state right now. They're all doing well. But, Clemson, to me, is showing toughness with 2 of their starters out in Chufo and Taylor. They're showing some toughness. They had went to Georgia last week in the midweek, and they lost in 15 innings, 4-3, against a good Georgia team. But it lasted 5.5 hours. I think they started at 7 and ended up after midnight. So it was a marathon game, probably took a little bit out of them. But then they go all the way to Louisville, and they beat Louisville 2 out of 3. And it was interesting. They won 12-11. In that first game against Louisville. At one point, they were losing 11-4. Okay, so they're showing some dang grittiness right there and toughness. I like that from a team. And then the middle game, they lost 6-7. And I don't know if you saw it or not, but one of Louisville's guys, I don't know if he hit a home run to win it or hit a home run, but he must have talked to the first baseman, Clemson's second baseman, Clemson's shortstop, Clemson's third baseman, the catcher, and he basically showed his ass. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word or not, but he basically did not, for me, respect the game. Well, Clemson comes back on Sunday, and what do? They 10-run roll them in 7 innings. They won 17-7, and all 9 starters for Clemson had a hit. So I don't know if it's the baseball gods or karma or whatever, but that kid from Louisville, he got exactly what he had asked for.
Mm-hmm.
And, Clemson, you got to give them credit. I mean, long game, middle of the week at Georgia, and then traveling on the road, and down that first game by a lot, came back, and then lost the next game, and then they hammered them on Sunday. So Clemson goes to 34-9. I think there's only 3 teams in the country with more wins than that, maybe 4. Their RPI is 4. They're 15-6 in the Atlantic division of the ACC, which is first in the Atlantic. I think they're a game and a half behind UNC because they lead the overall ACC at 17-7 now. But anyway, Clemson's in a great shape to be a top 8 national seed, which means if they win a regional, that means they get to host the Super as well. So that's the good thing about trying to be a top 8 seed. Now, they're going to have to finish strong, but right now, if it were to end right now, the season, they would be a national seed. They've been up there for a long time now. South Carolina probably had their best weekend to date. They had some rest. They had no games in the midweek, which means their pitchers were well rested, and they needed to be because Kentucky can really hit. But South Carolina had a heck of a comeback too. They were up 4-1, and I think it was the 9th inning, and Kentucky was up 4-1, and South Carolina hit 3 solo shots to tie it up. Then Kentucky scored another run, and then South Carolina hit the walk-off. So South Carolina showed a little toughness there, and they went on. They won the first game 6-5. They lost 13-15, and then on Sunday they just blew Kentucky's doors off. I don't know if anyone saw that coming. It was 10-0, and looked easy. But I think that was the biggest series for South Carolina. It helped their cause to host. You got 12 or 13 games left in the tournament, and they're looking to host. Well, their RPI went up to 11 from 14, so that's certainly good enough to host. Heck, if they finish really strong, they may be looking at trying to, be a top 8 national seed, but they'd have to really roll the table here next 3 weekends. But they have to avoid what happened to Coastal Carolina had that bad week.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have a bad week during the season, but you can't have a couple of them, or you just play yourselves right out of a regional. Coastal lost 11 points in the RPI. They're down to 24. Thank God that last week they went up about 10 or 11, but they lost 2 games which is unusual to be on the road at Creighton in Omaha, Nebraska. They lost 2 close games to Creighton, who's pretty good, and then they lost, I think, 7-3 and 5-4. They lost in 10 innings the second game to Creighton, and then Troy just came in. Troy's hot right now, and Troy won 8-6, 11-4, 15-3, and you never make excuses in college baseball, but I'm thinking Coastal was still they were still in Central Time or something, because they were struggling this weekend, but the good part about it is they're still 24 in the RPI, well in the they're definitely still in a regional at this point. But just like Clemson, they have no midweek game this week, which I think they need a little rest. But they have to travel to Southern Miss, and Southern Miss is a game ahead of them in the Sun Belt. The Southern Miss RPI is 46. I've played at Southern Miss before. It's not an easy place to play, and really, the last 15 years, you're looking at 2 of the top mid-majors in the country in Southern Miss and Coastal, and they're going at it this weekend. It's an unusual deal. I don't know if you looked at the Sun Belt records, but, Coastal and Southern Miss are, they're usually the top 2 teams, and right now, they're like they're like tied for 4th or something, and you got Coastal with a 24 RPI, and James Madison has a 30 RPI, but I think they're like 5th or 6th in the Sun Belt. So it's a strange year for that conference, and it's gonna, it'll all shake out in the wash here in the next couple of weeks and in the tournament. But the committee's going to have their hands full of RPI teams as opposed to teams that did better in the regular season, and who gets in and who doesn't get in. But I think Coastal, they need a good weekend against Southern Miss. I think that they're going to do it. I think Coach Gilmore's the type of coach to get them ready to go. And sometimes that bad week isn't bad to have, and maybe you get it out of the way, because you don't want to win 20 in a row and then go into the regionals. It's hard to maintain that. But they can't afford another bad week. They went 0-5, and they got to regroup. The upstart in South Carolina is College of Charleston. They have gone 17-2, which last time I checked, that's pretty darn good. They've only lost 2 games out of their last 19. Coach Holbrook's squad is up to 31-11. They're tied with Wilmington for 14-4 in the CAA first place regular season, and I think they beat Wilmington 2 out of 3, so they would have the tiebreaker to win the regular season if it ends up like that. But they're definitely, this past week, they beat the Citadel 5-4, and if they lost that one, that would have been tough, because the Citadel's RPI is 230 or something. But they beat them 5-4, and they lost to Campbell in the first game, but then they won the next two. So that's another South Carolina team showing some grit. And, Campbell's a good program, and they were down 0-1, and then they end up winning the series at Campbell. So they're up to 50 RPI from 64. They got to get it to about 40, 45, or they can always win the tournament. But they're squarely in the regional discussion for me right now. I'm not on the committee, but when they like teams that are hot down the stretch. Now, I took a peek at it. I used to coach with Coach Holbrook for a year. They've got to go to Towson, and Towson is, even though Towson does not have a good record and their RPI is bad, it's difficult to play up there on the road. I mean, there's going to be 10 or 11 people in the stands, and it's like, what are we doing up here?
Mm-hmm.
But they got to play them for 3. They play the Citadel again midweek. That's not a good RPI game. It needs to rain that day.
Yeah.
And they don't need to lose to the Citadel and lose about 10 points in the RPI. They may beat them and lose some points. And then they got 3 tough games against Northeastern, who's always good. They got a good RPI game at Duke coming up in a week or so. And then they're at Elon. So they have 11 games left. And they also have the CAA tourney. And, they're right now, I think they're in a regional, but they have to finish strong, and I'm pulling for them to do that. So you're looking at 4 teams right there that if things were to end right now, you'd probably have 4 teams in the state in the regionals, and that's before the tournaments, and there can be some upsets in the tournaments. Wofford's a 72 RPI, 28-13. USC Upstate is 88, 28-16. They're 13-5 in the Big South, and then Charleston Southern's RPI is 150, and they're 18-23. So the other teams, they're going to have to win their tournament if they're in their tournament. Presbyterian's RPI is 195 now. They're even at 22-22. But their record in the Big South is 12-6. Pretty good conference record for PC. Then Winthrop is down now. Them and the Citadel are battling it out for the worst RPI in the state. And I don't say that. I mean, college baseball is very difficult, but in certain leagues, if you don't play a good non-conference schedule and then you play a bad conference schedule, all of a sudden you don't have a good record, and all of a sudden the RPI really dips. So Winthrop is 231, and they're 15-23, and they got a tie. They're only 4-11 in the Big South, and then the Citadel 232 RPI, 17-25. They're 1-14 in their conference. Quick shout out still, I know we talked a little bit, but the Friday night comes back for South Carolina and Clemson were awesome. I mean, at one point, Clemson was down 11-4, and then South Carolina down 4-1. They hit 3 solo homers, and then Kentucky goes ahead, and then they hit a walk-off. I mean, that was incredible. So, shout out to both of them, and they both won their series. So it's a huge win for Clemson and South Carolina.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
Chris has got we got about 2 minutes, but Chris has got a question for you.
Yeah, Coach, I was curious about the situation in our states. Yesterday we had 3 run rule games, so I'm wondering if we're starting to get towards the end of the season that pitching is starting to lack a touch. And did you like the move that Eric Bakich did? Because Aiden Kanak has been his best pitcher all season, but he's also been their most utilized, 59 innings this season. He didn't pitch this weekend. Do you buy into sort of load management at this time of year, even for your frontline guys?
Yeah, well, I think the head coach and the pitching coach always talk about what the workload is for their pitchers, and they figure it out, and that's what them guys get paid the mega bucks for. But it always helps at the end of the year if you have them run rules, and I think it's a good rule in college baseball because some of these games are 15-2 in the 7th inning, and you got to keep playing them if you don't have that run rule. But some of the conferences have the run rule for the whole series, and I believe, and some of them just have it for Sunday, and I think it's a conference rule. But anyway, you're talking about a smart coach, and he knows how to manage the pitching staff. And same thing with all these other teams. But, some of the pitchers beginning to add up into some innings, and yeah, definitely need to be ready for the regional. So at some point, you got to give these guys a little bit of a break. I was going to say a little shout out Cole Mathis at College of Charleston. He raised his average. I don't know how you do this, but in one weekend he raised his average 50 points. Against Campbell, he went 11 for 14. Now, he hit 3 home runs, 7 runs, 10 RBIs. He's a first baseman catcher. He's one of the better hitters in the state of South Carolina. But I don't know what kind of scouting report Campbell had on him, but it didn't work. 11 for 14. The other thing I wanted to say is a shout out to one of my former recruits. I usually don't go all the way to Middle Tennessee State, but they put a freshman in the lineup. He hadn't been playing a whole lot. And the guy, Brett Von Dolan, in one game, listen to this. This is like a career for me. He was 3 home runs. 2 of them were grand slams. And he set the school record in one game, 10 RBIs.
Wow.
Basically, yeah, that's like a week for good hitters and a month for us bad hitters. But, man, good job, Brett Von Dolan, Middle Tennessee State, Blue Raiders, and it's good to see him. 10 RBIs, 3 home runs, 2 of them grand slams. That's he'll remember that for the rest of his life.
All right, Coach.
Other than that, I think we're getting really close to trying to figure out host regionals, national seeds, and who's in, who's out. And this is when college baseball is fun. Just trying to figure it out.
We call it, and we coined it here, just like we came up with March Madness a few years ago. We call it mayhem. College baseball mayhem. Okay.
Well, that's definitely starting, and it's going to be fun down the stretch. Let's keep it going.
Looking forward to being with you. Thank you, sir. Talk to you next week.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Coach Jim Toman never saw a clock he couldn't follow, whether it's a pitching clock or a on-the-air clock. No, we appreciate it. I have to just jump in sometimes and guide him from a time standpoint because time is of the essence.